Hello, and thank you for joining us here on the Humanity Matters series of podcasts at the Holocaust Memorial Tolerance Center. My name is Arnie Herz, and I am your host of Habits of a Whole Heart. And today I have the privilege of having with me Professor Peter Decherney, is an award-winning documentary filmmaker, fine art photographer, and author. I believe he's the author of 5 books. He's the chair of the Edward J. and Louise W. Kahn Endowed Chair at the Humanities at the University of Pennsylvania, where he's professor of cinema and media studies and director of the Penn Global Documentary Institute. Peter's photographs of global Jewish communities have been exhibited in New York, Los Angeles, Miami, and Philadelphia. And his book of photography, Endless Exodus, The Jewish Experience in Ethiopia, is coming in spring of 2026. Peter, has that been published yet?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, so we'll talk about that a little bit in a moment. Since 2019, Peter has partnered with the African Jewish communities in a series of documentary films. The award-winning Days Between Rest and the Cave Synagogue chronicle pivotal moments in the history of Uganda's Abayudaya community. Peter, I could keep reading your biography for 15 minutes, and I'm not, just because we only have 25 minutes on this podcast. I met you about a month ago through a mutual connection, and I was very impressed with your work. And as you know, about 8 episodes ago, I featured 2 Jews from Uganda who have sought political asylum here in the United States. It was a fascinating story, and that one thing led to the next, and I learned about your documenting of Jewish communities in Africa. So we're here today to talk about your fascinating work and talk about documentary filmmaking in general and what creates stories and so on and so forth. So thank you for joining me here today.
No, thank you so much for having me here, for your interest.
Peter, could you tell us a little bit about your book that just came out?
In 2019, 2020, I applied for a grant. I thought I knew the history of the Jewish communities from Ethiopia, and I knew about waves of Aliyah, of emigration to Israel from starting in the 1970s through the 2000s. I didn't know as that much about the community that was still living in Ethiopia. And so in 2019 and 2020, I had applied for a grant and traveled there twice to start to talk to people and film them. And then in 2020, I released a film called Dreaming of Jerusalem on Discovery Plus. And it's really about a few stories about life in Uganda, Ethiopia today, and the Jewish community there. But as we showed the film, I realized that people don't know that much about the history. They definitely don't know much about what's happening there now. So I went back a number of times to create this book of photographs, and it begins with a historical essay from the kind of biblical times till today. That's not really that widely available, definitely not in a kind of easily accessible form. You have to kind of read academic textbooks to find it out. So I read those so you don't have to. And it's also my first book of photography. I'll show it again. I'm really happy with the way the images came out. Although I'm a filmmaker and a scholar, really photography is my first love. I had a darkroom growing up. Always been kind of passionate about photography.
So what is it, Peter, about photography that you like?
Yeah, it's funny. People often think that you should put your phone away and experience a moment, but I actually find that photography, having my camera out, makes me much more attuned to the situation I'm in. It actually makes me more present, and it certainly helps my memory. I really can remember almost every photograph that I've taken in a way that I can't really remember moments in my life. They're vaguer. They're not as crisp and precise as the photographs. But also, I mean, I love the process of taking photographs. These are my photographs in the book. Are kind of the result of a process I've developed over a long time. They use very long exposures. So the exposure is, the sensor is exposed for a long time. That means you can only really capture people when they're very still, when they're kind of inside of themselves, maybe in a spiritual moment. And it's a very kind of intimate moment to sort of capture with someone. I love sitting down, talking to people for learning their life stories as I photograph them, and also the photograph is kind of one step in a long process. Often it takes years to get to know people and to connect with communities before I take out my camera. I show the photographs as they're being made. I always have returned everywhere to show photographs, to share them.
How do people, first of all, this is not what we had planned to talk about, but this is one thing about my podcast, Habits of a Whole Heart. And you never know what topic may be of real interest in the moment. And I find this, fascinating in terms of, you say it takes years to get to know people before you even take out your camera. But we're living in such a world that people are taking pictures all the time of everything. And I'm not sure people are, like you're saying, that taking the photo makes you feel present, but I'm not sure that's the experience of other people, but your whole process is different. So could you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, so my most recent film is about a Basque photographer, not about a Jewish community. Fernando Postigo, there's half of the poster. He was a photojournalist who returned to the Basque country, to San Sebastian, after Franco's death in 1975, and just started taking a job as a photographer for a newspaper. And he only planned to do that for a few months, and he ended up doing it for the next few decades. And he chronicled the Basque separatist movement, and he showed up at events as they were happening. He just captured unbelievable moments, truths that just would not exist without him. People used to call him because they knew that once the press, once politicians started to spin the story, it gets farther away from the truth of the moment. But he was there first and saw what happened. Since he's retired, he's actually become more of a chronicler, and he started to put his own work together in books. And it's kind of amazing going through these photographs with him. He remembers every person, every name, every detail, event, date. And I really think this kind of process of being a photographer helps you to kind of fix these moments, and something gets fixed in your memory at the same time that it gets fixed on on film, on the sound, on the electronic sensor.
Peter, I read this book by Amy Herman. I don't know if you're familiar with her works, Visual Intelligence and the Art of Problem Solving and Studying Art. And it's changed the way, when I travel, I think about, as a photographer, even when I don't have my camera out, just framing. What is it that we're noticing? What is it that we're not noticing? What is it about this moment that we're trying to capture? And it's a little bit of thoughtfulness that I bring into it. It sounds like you're bringing it to a whole other level in what you're doing. And by getting to know people before you take out the camera, how does that change the photo?
Yeah, interesting. Maybe we should back up though, so people have a sense of who I am, and where I come from. So I'm a professor at the University of Pennsylvania. I'm a media historian, and I've written a bunch of books on the history of Hollywood and on other topics. I'm also a documentary filmmaker and photographer, as you've mentioned, and as they've already heard. But also, as you've said, I run the Penn Global Documentary Institute, and often travel with students to make documentaries. I had student assistants on every photography trip to Ethiopia. Um, and uh, and so this is kind of connecting with communities, teaching students, having students connect with the people that are the subjects of the documentaries. Is all part of building that kind of community is also a part of the process.
Very congratulations on all your success. One of the things I noticed on your website with your students that you bring along, they come from all different types of races and nationalities, and bringing them to various different parts of the world. What's that like for them and for you?
Yeah, I mean, so first I'll say I think this is in some ways where education is moving. Um, it's a lot of the classes that I teach are more of a laboratory style. We're creating something together. We're solving a problem. We're making a film. They learn history. They learn skills. They learn theory. They learn ethics of making media. And then they actually create something at the end that we will show to people, and sometimes that we make for in partnership with communities that we work with, or if we're working on campus, other divisions of the university. Because I also make virtual reality films, and we do that often with other offices or element, or we've done it with the hospital, the radio station here. So what is it like for them? Yeah, so I mean, there's just no substitute for traveling, for meeting people, for talking to them, for learning about their lives. So often when people travel, they travel as tourists. They go to museums, they go to restaurants that tourists tend to go to, And it's a curated experience. I'm not saying you can't learn a lot from that experience, but it's really a privilege to be able to be invited into people's homes and stores and really get to know the way they live every day. We stay in touch. I mean, I wake up every day to dozens of WhatsApp messages, and so many of my students have continued to have friendships with people we've met while making different films.
Do you think it makes the world more complex for them? And it's a counterbalance to an oversimplification?
I mean, I think that's exactly right. When you read when you read the news, you obviously are only going to get a kind of high level and a take, and when you meet individuals and you learn about their lives, then every story is much more complex.
I've been very involved in Jewish advocacy for years, and this past February, I had the opportunity to visit a home in the heart of Judean Samaria of a Palestinian family, and it was very transformative for me to actually be in someone's home, breaking bread, pita, and tea, husband, wife, 5 children, mother, and really added deep layers of complexity to what we often want to just oversimplify with such a busy world. And I find interesting about going back to the photograph. The photograph is just like one shot in time. And you would think, in a sense, it's flat because it's two-dimensional, a photograph. And yet your approach is so multidimensional in what it really means to take a photograph as opposed to just being a tourist taking photos.
Yeah. So two things in response. One about connecting with other people is, something I talk to students a lot about is just the importance of listening and not judging. And one time we went back to Uganda, and the students collected oral histories of members of the elders in the Abayudaya community. And the students really could take ownership of this. They did the interviews, they handled the sound and the cameras, and they did 2-hour long interviews with members of the community. And really, they just listened and asked thoughtful questions. And sometimes the students might not have agreed with what they were hearing. They might have wanted to jump in and challenge someone, but they really had to just practice sitting and listening and hearing someone's story. And that's great on both sides. I mean, I think there's just people often ask, how do we know we're hearing the truth from people we're interviewing? And that's obviously something that takes a long time, that is built on trust, and it takes a long time to kind of get used to knowing, if you think you're hearing the truth. But also, what I find is the opposite, that there's really people feel there's a value in telling their story. They really feel honored by being heard, and they want to talk to you. And then the second question was about photographs, and you're just capturing a moment. We all take pictures of family events and important moments and meals, and they're really meaningful to us because they are mnemonic devices to help us remember an important event and the emotion of the event, right? And it's about connecting us to our feelings of the past. I actually think when you create a photograph for a book or for an exhibition, it's different. It's not for me. I'm trying to communicate something. And so I'm not interested in how I felt when I took the picture. I'm interested in finding photographs that I think communicate something about the subjects, about the moment, about the culture. But often it's about the beauty in those moments. People often say, "Oh, I was there. I didn't see what you saw. It looked different to me." The synagogue in Gondar is a dirt floor. It's rickety, metal benches that people sit on, corrugated metal walls. But when the lights hit it during the morning service, it really becomes very beautiful. And that's I'd like to see it when it's illuminated and really shows the beauty of the moment and how important it is for the people who are in it.
I think so much of the time, are rushing through our lives that we just don't notice the beauty that's there. The discipline my wife and I have developed as we go for a walk, pointing out trees and the skyline and the sunset to start noticing. And what sounds like with your book, you're really highlighting for people, here's incredible beauty, and then it starts training you to start searching for it. So pivoting from photography into documentary filmmaking and telling a story, and obviously in doing a documentary film, there's what's included and there's much more of what's not included because you have to be selective. How do you go about deciding what to include and not include? And is there sort of an overall arch that you start with and find that which fits within that storyline?
People are often surprised to find that documentary films have scripts often. And you have a plan for what you think will happen. I tend to think about it like a science experiment. There's a hypothesis, there's what I think I will find, and then we go and we start to collect data, we shoot footage, we talk to people, and we revise the story. And then there's a kind of third opportunity when we edit it to find a way to take what we found, put it together so that we can communicate it to someone else, so that it really is intelligible and clear and captures the feeling and emotion and not just the narrative and the details. And hopefully it changes along the way. I mean, if I just find what I had planned to find from the beginning, I probably haven't done a good job, because the point of going and having these experiences and photographing them is, as you were saying earlier, is to understand the complexity that you just can't have before you've really been there and spoken to people.
I think about in terms of a lot of films around the Holocaust as one example of propaganda. And what you said is that you start with a hypothesis, but you're testing the hypothesis. You want to find out where that hypothesis is wrong. Your goal, as you said, is to see where it's wrong or incomplete and to create a more complete picture to get to this idea of truth or something closer to truth. And that's the Talmudic debate process between Hillel and Shammai and all the other great sages. The goal was to get to truth, not to validation of what you believe. And I'm just noticing how you're getting it right and not trying to just be right. And the students sounds like they really want that as well.
Yeah. So let me tell the story about one film called The Cave Synagogue, the shortest film I've ever made. It's 8 minutes long. And it's in the Abayudaya, going back to Uganda. The Abayudaya Jewish community begins in 1919 when Semi Kakangulu, who's a local ruler, converts himself to Judaism, builds up a community of several thousand members of his Jewish community. Then in 1971, Idi Amin takes over, becomes the president, a dictator, outlaws Judaism. Most Jews convert to Islam and Christianity, but a few hundred members of Kakangulu's community continue to practice Judaism secretly in a synagogue, in a cave at the bottom of a ravine, the Cave Synagogue. And then actually after that, so the first time I went to the Cave Synagogue, I was talking to a man named J.J. Keck, who is an elder in the community now. He was 11 in 1971 when Idi Amin took over. He lives on a farm not far from the Cave Synagogue. And I was talking to him and asking him about the cave. And he said, "Oh, do you want to go there?" And I didn't know that they knew where it was, that they still could go. And he was wearing his mud boots already, so he knew we were going to be going. And I followed him, and my colleagues and students, we followed him down as he and his family, friends sang, prayed there, and then we hiked back up. And I knew that should be I wanted to take other people into that experience, and I knew that should be a film. And so that is the film. He walks with his family and friends to the Cave Synagogue as they sing, and tells the story of the synagogue and walks back up.
That's extraordinary. How can we watch that? How could our listeners watch that film or any of your films?
That film and the other one you mentioned, Days Between Rest, will be on HiFlix, the streaming service, sometime this summer. And then we'll just, as the films finish the festival runs, we'll just keep adding to this series about African Jewish communities. And
all this is on your website, correct?
Yes. So just Decherney.org or pennglobaldocs.org.
pennglobaldocs.org. maybe a little bit easier for people to remember, and we'll put these in the show notes. So without that sounds extraordinary, going into a cave, and it was so recent too. I think about a cave, I think of Shimon Bar Yochai, and I think of, but this is within my lifetime.
Amazing story, and kind of generational trauma that the Abayudaya often connect to other experiences.
And they've been through a lot. This was the two young men from Uganda who were on my podcast were from that community, and they had shared about how there was a tremendous amount of harmony and respect growing up after Idi Amin era, of course.
Yeah, so JJ and his two brothers in the 1980s decide to rebuild the Jewish community. And so they take back by force Nabagoya Hill, which had been the Jewish land before Idi Amin. And then they start a kibbutz in Uganda. And among other things, they rethink Jewish music, and they combine Jewish music with Ugandan folk music and start to create really beautiful versions of traditional Jewish songs. The rabbi from Tufts Hillel goes and visits them, and he records it. It's released as a Smithsonian Folkways album, which you can find still, just called Abayudaya Jewish music from Abayudaya music from Uganda, something like that. And it goes on to be nominated for a Grammy. They lost to Ladysmith Black Mambazo, but yeah, the album and the music still, it can be found. People started to join the kibbutz, and then eventually that led to the to kind of growth of the community, and there are about a dozen synagogues now.
One of the things I'm thinking about what you're doing, and I often think about the state of the world that we live in, the state of education, and people just with confirmation bias looking to confirm what they already think or know, not really taking the time to process. And again, going back to your hypothesis and trying to understand different aspects of the story and telling story and really with the goal towards getting to truth and to highlighting that which is positive also is part of it. You could be a documentary storyteller, like I think a lot of the political advertisements out there are just highlighting the worst in others. And this is different. And you also talked about presence, that you're really present with someone, you're really listening to someone, you're really trying to understand. And I think I think you offer filmmaking, photography is a methodology for developing the brain and developing our humanity.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing about the Cave Synagogue film is that it's about the most traumatic moment in their history, and yet it's actually a very uplifting, I think, beautiful film. JJ is just someone who's full of energy. He and his family and friends are incredible musicians, and they are just singing and playing songs as they walk down and walk back up. And so, yeah, it's not what you would expect, the way that we would tell the story of this traumatic event. It's actually a really uplifting story of a community that rebuilds itself.
One of the things I often share with people in my programs is if you look at the three most transformative events of your life, and almost always it's something very negative that they would never want. An illness, some break part, something happens. And so here we're learning from them that they had this traumatic event, but they were able to use it as a point of growth and development. We're running out of time, and I can't believe how fast the time has gone. But I want to ask you a question about authenticity in the time of AI, and how you see AI having an impact in what you're doing to counter it, and just get some of your thoughts.
AI could never obviously recreate the kinds of films that I'm interested in making. They are really about human connection and showing up and spending time with people. It's concerning that it's become so difficult to tell the difference between AI images and real images. But I still just think people are going to continue to crave the kind of real images that I create with my students. I actually think AI is a great tool, and we're still trying to figure out how to use it. Um, and I definitely, I have students use it in classes. We use it to do research. Um, there are ways that it can really help with photography. It can clean up the noise in images, and take images that you could never capture in low light before. So much of my photography is actually indoors in low light in someone's home, in a synagogue. There's actually a point at which cameras can no longer capture something because it's become too dark. But actually, you can boost the ISO, the gain, bring more light into it. Normally, that kind of destroys the image. But with AI, all of a sudden, we can capture those kinds of images that we couldn't capture before, and actually recreate those real moments that we just didn't have the technology to capture. And actually, the other big innovation that's I find that really helps what I do is something called in-body image stabilization. So the sensors using AI can actually counteract your movement, and it allows me to have my shutter open much longer, and so I can really capture pictures of people when they're very still in low light situations in a way you just couldn't do before. So AI actually, this is maybe it's paradoxical, but AI opens up these possibilities for capturing the real.
It's like so many things in life. It's a powerful, powerful tool that could be used good or for bad. Habits of a Whole Heart is really about helping people create a meaningful and impactful life that benefits others. And through the prism of photography and filmmaking, what you're really bringing forth, again, through your own choice, right, is to seek what's authentic, to connect with other human beings, to tell stories that people aren't telling, so people feel validated and heard, and because they have important stories to tell, and to use this as a collaborative process with your students where we're working together as a team, and to enhance life and show that which is beautiful. I mean, that's my real takeout from listening to what you're sharing today, and it's very, very powerful. And I'm really eager to watch a number of your films and get your book. And I feel very privileged to have gotten to know you. And this conversation, as many on the Habits of a Whole Heart, just sort of takes its own life, but you've brought the meaning and purpose through your work to us today. So thank you so much for your time and your dedication.
As you can hear, I prefer to be on that side of the interview, but I appreciate being heard and hearing you. Appreciate the work I'm doing.
That's great. Well, you're a professor, so you're used to that side of the coin, but you're absolutely excellent on this other side too, as the expert that I'm able to cultivate. So keep up all the great work, and you give me hope for the education system, which I've been very concerned about lately, and may your work continue to expand and be successful. So thank you, Peter, and everyone could check the show notes, Peter Decherney, and his Penn Global Docs.org. And again, we'll be in the show notes. So Peter, thank you very much. And thank you to everyone for tuning in to Habits of a Whole Heart here on the Humanity Matters series on hmTv. Please tune in to all of our episodes. This on just humanity on Habits of a Whole Heart, I believe, is our 49th episode. And this is part of a series of over 650 episodes overall. We're really trying to bring and highlight that which is beneficial into the world, just like Peter's work of highlighting and documenting and showing that which is uplifting for humanity. Thank you very much and have a great day.